Millions of people believe in creatures that have never been proven to exist, and the reason why says more about human psychology than it does about monsters. You've heard the names your whole life. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Mothman. None of them have ever been caught. None of them have ever been conclusively proven real. And yet the sightings keep coming. The stories keep spreading. And entire industries exist around creatures that might be nothing more than shadows and misidentified animals. Today, you're going to find out where each of these creatures actually came from, why people keep believing in them, and what science says is most likely behind every single one. These are some of the world's most famous mythical creatures explained. Let's get into it. Bigfoot, also called Sasquatch, has been reported across North America for over a century, with the Pacific Northwest producing the highest concentration of sightings. The modern version of the legend exploded in 1958 when a California newspaper published a story about a construction worker named Jerry Crew, who found enormous human-like footprints near his work site in Bluff Creek. The story went national overnight. What most people don't know is that decades later, a man named Ray Wallace confessed on his deathbed that he had carved the feet and faked those original tracks as a prank. The 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, which shows a large figure walking through a clearing and is still the most famous Bigfoot footage ever recorded, has never been definitively proven fake or real. Experts who have analyzed it remain divided. What science does say is that a creature of that size would require a sustainable breeding population to survive, and no bones, no body, and no confirmed biological evidence has ever been found. The most likely explanation is a combination of misidentified bears, hoaxes, and the very human tendency to see patterns and figures in natural shapes, a phenomenon called pareidolia. But if Bigfoot is probably a hoax, the next creature on this list has something far stranger going on beneath the surface. The Loch Ness Monster, also known simply as Nessie. It got its name from Loch Ness, which is a long, deep, cold lake in the Scottish Highlands, and since 1933 it has been famous for one reason. That year, a local couple reported seeing an enormous animal rolling and plunging on the surface of the water. The story ran in a local newspaper, and within months, Loch Ness was international news. The most iconic piece of evidence, a photograph taken in 1934 showing a long neck rising from the water, was published worldwide and became the defining image of the creature. In 1994, it was exposed as a hoax. The neck in the photograph was a sculpted head attached to a toy submarine. In 2019, researchers conducted an environmental DNA survey of Loch Ness, collecting water samples throughout the lake and analyzing traces of biological material. They found no evidence of a large reptile, a dinosaur, or any unknown species. What they did find in abundance was eel DNA, leading some scientists to suggest that oversized eels may account for some sightings. The lake itself makes mystery easy. It's deep enough that its floor remains poorly mapped, and its dark, murky water limits visibility to just a few feet. In those conditions, a large fish, a swimming deer, or even a wave can look like something that shouldn't exist. The next creature on the list started with a single newspaper story in Puerto Rico and spread across an entire continent in under a year. Chupacabra. Unlike Bigfoot or Nessie, the Chupacabra is not ancient folklore. It was born in 1995 in Puerto Rico when a woman named Madeline Tolentino reported seeing a strange reptilian creature, and shortly after, farmers across the region began finding their animals dead with no clear explanation. The story spread rapidly across Latin America and into the United States, and the name, which translates to goatsucker, stuck. Early descriptions painted the creature as reptilian, spiny, and roughly the size of a small bear. Later, American sightings produced photographs and remains of hairless animals with elongated features that looked genuinely alien. When those remains were tested, every single one turned out to be a dog, coyote, or raccoon with a severe skin condition that distorts their features and makes them completely unrecognizable. The original Puerto Rico sightings are widely believed by researchers to have been influenced by the 1995 science fiction film Species, which Tolentino had recently seen, and which features a creature matching her description almost exactly. The Chupacabra is one of the clearest modern examples of how a legend can be born, spread, and reinforced before any facts are checked. If you're finding this interesting, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss the next video, because there are plenty more topics like this one coming. The next creature is different from everything you have heard so far, and it is the only one on this list tied directly to a real disaster. Between November 1966 and December 1967, the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia experienced something that still has no clean explanation. Dozens of residents reported seeing a large winged figure with glowing red eyes. The sightings clustered around an area called the TNT area, an abandoned World War II munitions site on the edge of town. Then, on December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. In the years that followed, the Mothman became linked to the disaster, framed as either a warning or an omen. The creature itself has multiple prosaic explanations. Ornithologists have pointed to the sandhill crane, a large bird with a wingspan over 6 feet and red markings around the eyes that migrates through the Ohio Valley. The glowing red eyes reported by witnesses are consistent with eyeshine, the reflective effect produced when light hits an animal's eyes in the dark. What makes Mothman unusual compared to other cryptids is that the sightings were dense, localized, and reported by multiple independent witnesses in a short time frame. Whether that reflects a genuine unknown animal, mass suggestion, or something else entirely, no one has settled it. The Mothman stayed in one town for just over a year. The next creature terrorized sailors across entire oceans for centuries, and unlike most things on this list, part of it turned out to be completely real. Kraken. Of all the creatures on this list, the Kraken is the one with the most truth buried inside it. Scandinavian sailors told stories for centuries of a massive tentacled beast, large enough to drag ships beneath the water. For most of history, it was treated as pure mythology. Then in the mid-1800s, pieces of enormous tentacles began washing ashore. In 1870, a near-complete carcass was recovered in Newfoundland. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, is real. It can reach lengths of up to 43 feet, has eyes the size of dinner plates, and lives in deep ocean water that remained almost entirely unexplored until recently. The first confirmed photograph of a living giant squid in its natural habitat wasn't taken until 2004. The Kraken, more than any other creature on this list, illustrates why these legends persist. Sometimes the ocean is simply big enough to hide something extraordinary. The creature made such an impression on popular culture that the NHL named the Seattle expansion team after it in 2021. The next creature has been haunting one patch of forest in New Jersey for over 300 years, has never come close to being explained, and happens to share its name with another NHL franchise that plays just a few miles from those same woods. The Jersey Devil. The Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey cover over 1 million acres of dense, largely uninhabited forest, and since the 1700s they have been home to one of America's strangest legends. The Jersey Devil is described as a creature with a horse's head, bat wings, a forked tail, and cloven hooves, and its origin story is tied to a colonial-era woman named Mother Leeds, who allegedly cursed her 13th child. In 1909, the legend reached its peak when hundreds of sightings flooded newspapers across New Jersey and Pennsylvania over the course of a single week. Businesses closed, schools kept children inside, and posadas formed to hunt the creature. Most historians who have studied the 1909 wave believe it was driven almost entirely by sensationalist newspaper coverage, competitive reporting between publications, and collective hysteria feeding on itself. The creature's description has never been consistent across witnesses, which is itself a red flag. Real animals produce consistent descriptions. Legends evolve to match the expectations of whoever is telling the story. The Jersey Devil might be America's most local legend. The next two creatures come from traditions far older than any newspaper, and one of them was never really about a monster at all. The Thunderbird. Long before European settlers arrived in North America, indigenous nations across the continent shared stories of an enormous bird powerful enough to create thunder with the beat of its wings and lightning with the blink of its eyes. The Thunderbird appears in the traditions of tribes from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains to the Great Lakes, which makes it one of the oldest legends on this list by several centuries. Modern sightings began picking up in the late 1800s and have never fully stopped. Witnesses across Illinois, Pennsylvania, Alaska, and Texas have reported seeing birds with wingspans ranging in their descriptions from 10 feet to over 20. In 2002, a cluster of sightings in rural Alaska drew enough attention that local pilots began scanning the area from the air. Nothing was found. The most scientifically credible explanation points to the Teratornis, a real prehistoric bird with a wingspan of up to 12 feet that lived alongside early humans in North America, and went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago. Some researchers have suggested that cultural memory of genuinely enormous birds, passed down across generations, forms the backbone of the legend. Others point to the California condor, a large dark bird with a wingspan approaching 10 feet that was once far more widespread across the continent than it is today. What makes Thunderbird different from most cryptids is that the core of the legend is not biologically implausible. The argument is not whether giant birds ever existed, it's whether any are still flying. The Thunderbird is frightening because it might be real. The final creature on this list is frightening for a completely different reason. The Wendigo comes from Algonquian-speaking peoples of the northern forests of Canada and the Great Lakes region, and it is darker than anything else on this list. The creature was described as a towering figure, taller than any man, with hollow, sunken eyes, gray, stretched skin pulled tight over visible bones, and breath that came out as frozen mist in the cold winter air. In its original cultural context, the Wendigo was not simply a monster, it was a warning. The creature was associated with winter, isolation, and starvation, a being that represented what happens to a person when survival pushes them past the limits of their humanity. To become a Wendigo was to lose yourself entirely, consumed from the inside by an insatiable hunger that nothing could ever satisfy. Psychiatrists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries documented cases among indigenous communities of a condition they labeled Wendigo psychosis, in which individuals became convinced they were transforming into the creature and losing their grip on who they were. Whether that represented a genuine culture-bound syndrome, misdiagnosis by outside observers, or something else entirely remains debated among anthropologists today. The modern pop culture Wendigo, the antlered skeletal figure that appears in films and video games, is largely a recent invention layered on top of a much older and more serious tradition. What the original legend captures is something that science fully agrees with. Prolonged isolation and starvation do profound and sometimes irreversible things to the human mind. The Wendigo may be the one creature on this list that was never really about an animal at all. It was about what people are capable of becoming. What connects every single one of these creatures is not evidence. It's human need. The need to believe that something unknown is still out there, that the world is stranger and bigger than it appears, and that not everything has been mapped, explained, and filed away. Science hasn't proven any of them real, but it also hasn't made the stories any less interesting. And that's probably why you clicked on this video in the first place.